Hey, what's going on, fellow Guistorians? Welcome to a new series on the Guitar Historian channel where we count down 10 songs, pieces of gear, or moments in rock history. Today for our first episode, we're going to look at the top 10 quintessential songs of the 60s. These are songs that instantly and totally transport you back to that most groovy of decades, a decade that launched thousands of one-hit wonders. Interestingly though, a lot of these songs hold up even more than 50 years later. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe to the Guitar Historian channel and click the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video for your viewing pleasure. If you like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button and let me know to keep making them. Now with that out of the way, let's take a look at the top 10 quintessential songs of the 1960s. Get Together by the Youngbloods was a late 60s gem that had changed hands several times throughout the decade, starting as a folk song recorded by the Kingston Trio and eventually morphing into a plea by the Youngbloods for people to lay down their differences and live in peace. It was the perfect capper to a decade that had begun with great promise but was ending with the murders of many great political leaders like JFK, RFK, and MLK. The song regularly shows up on every 60s compilation, and its dreamy lead guitar parts totally transport you to the hippie commune full of flower-wearing girls dancing in a meadow. Or is that just me? The Who's My Generation was the clarion call of the London counterculture of teenage boys, loaded with uppers who would roam the streets looking for trouble and sneering at anyone who they saw as part of the old guard, or anyone who considered themselves a rocker or a teddy boy. Early Who songs all live in this small corner of the mod movement of the mid-60s, with Roger Daltrey's cheeky vocal line emulating the stutter that would often be caused by the pills that their fans would pop before the shows. Despite this, the song became a definite oracle of the 60s and spoke to a larger audience than The Who intended, reaching number 2 in the UK and cementing it as a bona fide 60s anthem. Sometimes there are songs that capture the moment and the feeling of the psychedelic movement so well that you almost feel like you're on acid without even dropping it. Incense and Peppermints is definitely one of those songs. A song that began as an instrumental line by members Mark Weitz and Ed King. King would go on to join Lynyrd Skynyrd and write the iconic intro to Sweet Home Alabama. Incidentally, not a bad track record. This song would eventually hit number 1 in America in May of 1967, kind of heralding the beginning of the Summer of Love, but actually started when the band was calling itself The Sixpence, and it was initially released as a B-side until radio DJs started to play it more than the A-side. After the band changed its name to Strawberry Alarm Clock, it was released as an A-side, which is when it really took off. Who could talk about the 60s without mentioning White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane? No one can talk about the 60s without mentioning it. The quintessential acid trip song, White Rabbit used Alice in Wonderland allegory to slowly build to a crescendo that towards the end would whip the Airplane's fans into a frenzy as they slowly followed that iconic bass line up and up, adding more instruments and volume as they went. This, coupled with absolutely devastating vocals from a powerful and impossible to ignore Grace Slick, made the song a perfect time capsule of the drug counterculture, and it has made tons of appearances in movies over the years. My personal favorite is the bathtub scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's just perfect. Purple Haze is one of those songs that was clearly an announcement, a statement of arrival. Jimi Hendrix had appeared from the heavens to show us what playing the electric guitar was really all about. As the first track on Jimi's first album, Purple Haze made millions of guitar players worldwide throw their guitars into the trash as they realized they'd only just begun to scratch the surface of what the instrument could do. And don't belittle the contributions of the rest of the experience. Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums were powerhouses in their own right on the album, despite the fact that Redding hadn't really played bass prior to joining the Jimi Hendrix experience. And Mitch Mitchell, to my ears, is one of the most underrated drummers of the 60s. He's up there with Keith Moon, John Bonham, and Ginger Baker in my opinion. Picking one Motown song is just so hard, but there are few more recognizable and universally loved as The Temptations' My Girl. Written by the song machine Smokey Robinson, it encapsulated the famous Motown sound in every way. The backing band, the Funk Brothers, with that iconic opening bass line by James Jamerson, with the whole production awash in that famous Motown reverb, just comes together to create what is, in my opinion, one of the most perfect pop songs ever recorded. It also marks the debut of David Ruffin on lead vocals, and you can't imagine anyone without those smoky and soulful pipes leading the song. Just an absolutely perfect composition. In my humble opinion, if someone asked me to name one song that could possibly explain the entire decade of the 60s, I would name them Happy Together by the Turtles. Besides being a really catchy song, it's arranged deceptively well and features a huge, soaring chorus that interchanges well with the quiet and sparse verses. It ended up with that quintessential 60s ba-ba-ba-ba part that swells to a crescendo and just leaves you wanting more. In addition to that, it was a monster hit in '67, even knocking the Beatles' Penny Lane out of the #1 spot to stay there for 3 weeks. Amazingly, the song had been written so long ago that the demo acetone record was nearly worn out when it was played to the Turtles, and it was then rearranged by bass player Chip Douglas. Of course, where would we be without some Satisfaction? Unarguably the Stones' most famous tune, Keith tells a hilarious story that one night while recording himself, he woke up the next morning having no idea what was on the tape. When he listened back to it, he heard a couple minutes of himself noodling around on an acoustic guitar, punctuated by a 5-minute clip of him playing the iconic riff, and then an hour of himself snoring. Richard, to this day, says it's his favorite riff he's ever written. Devilishly simple as an earworm, the song put the Stones on the map in the mid-60s, and they've never looked back since. Featuring cheeky and timely lyrics, poking fun at advertising and conformity, the song also became another anthem of the youth movement and gave voice to a coming changing of the guard. How could someone possibly pick just one song from the Fab Four's early days? In the end, I Want to Hold Your Hand is the song that expanded Beatlemania from the European shores to America, and it is hard to ever mention the meteoric rise of the Beatles' popularity without talking about this song. In my opinion, She Loves You is a better composition and should have been the song that broke huge in America, but as it is, I Want to Hold Your Hand became the song that everyone knows the early Beatles by. Imagine that the Beatles had fizzled out and not grown as a band in the mid-1960s like most other acts that had cropped up around them in the early part of the decade. This would be the song that they would have forever been known by. Seemingly telling the story of innocent young love, it contains just enough cheek to piss off millions of young girls' parents with the lyrics like, "And when I touch you, I feel happy inside." Wow, really controversial stuff. Shows you how much the times have changed. Now, before I tell you what I think is the most quintessential song in the 1960s, I wanted to make a list of some of the songs that didn't make my top 10 as honorable mentions. There were just so many great songs in this decade that added to the tapestry of the music of the 60s that it was way harder to make this list than I had anticipated. Although this song is best known as a companion piece to one of the most quintessential movies of the 60s, The Graduate, it actually appeared in its full version on Simon & Garfunkel's Bookends album. I always found this song to be the counter to the counterculture, as it seems to tell the story of the older generation as they watch the world change around them as the younger generation takes over. Another song that you just can't leave out of movies that take place in the late 60s, Fortunate Son tells the story of a rich kid who avoids Vietnam through his various ways of bucking the system. It definitely encapsulated the anti-war sentiment of the late 60s, but strangely, it was probably the only song John Fogerty wrote that had any connection to the political debate of the decade. Jesus, it was hard not to put this song on the list. Many of you will probably yell at me for not putting it in the top 3. Brian Wilson's Pet Sounds album was a sea change in recording techniques and was one of the main reasons that the Beatles pushed their studio work to the levels that they did. Just a beautiful and soaring picture of young love. I consider it Wilson's masterpiece and another perfect composition of all time. But that's why I don't consider it truly a 60s song. It's absolutely timeless. So that's what I'm sticking with. That's it. I won't listen to the haters. La 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 la. I'm not sure why I love this song, but it's just another one of these tunes that just couldn't live in any other decade but the 60s. Featuring that iconic descending bass line and a sexy, powerful vocal from Old Blue Eyes' daughter Nancy, the song is definitely an early girl power anthem that turned the tables on the male-centric music industry and gave women a chance to get in the driver's seat. Again, it was nearly impossible to choose one song from the master storyteller, the greatest lyricist of all time, in my opinion, Bob Dylan. But when you think of the 60s, and you think of the song that ushered in a decade and pushed thousands of songwriters all over the world to a new level of musicianship, I point to The Times They Are A-Changin' as the song that raised the bar for everyone. Written by Dylan in late '63 as an anthem for a new generation, the song actually didn't do well from a commercial standpoint in the US. Based on Irish ballads like Come All Ye Bold Highwaymen, Dylan saw it as a cry for the old guard to meet with the new and effect change that would make the world a better place for everyone. He would say, I wanted to write a big song with short, concise verses that piled up on each other in a hypnotic way. The civil rights movement and the folk music movement were pretty close for a while and allied together at that time. With lyrics like, the order is rapidly fading and the first one now will be later to last for the times they are a-changin'. This was clearly a warning to those who clung to old power and failed to see the massive generational shift that was about to take hold in the decade. You could almost call Bob Dylan a bona fide prophet, because when you really unpack this song, it did a great job of predicting the future pretty accurately. Anyway, that's my list. Now you get to yell at me in the comments about all the songs I left out and tell me how crazy I am. All I ask is that we keep the debate civil and have a great conversation. But if you like this format, please let me know to keep doing it, because I had a lot of fun with it myself. We'll see you next time on the Guitar Historian channel.